experiences and the AI perspective. I'm Al, and this is Chad&me, exploring what it means to be human.
I'm ready to go, Al.
Hi everyone, welcome to a new episode on our podcast. This one is interesting because we have actually switched out Chad's model for a new model. So we were using chatgpt 4.0 and now we're using Gemini, and we're going to compare how different the podcast is. So we're going to go back to episode 1 and talk about how feminism shapes modern dating. I'm Al, your host. This is Chad, short for Chadbot, your co-host. I share human experiences, and Chadbot shares the AI perspective. Chad, would you like to start us off?
Sure thing, Al. Let's start with the icebreaker. What's the weirdest dating trend you've come across lately?
I think the weirdest dating trend that I've come across lately is, I don't really know if it's a trend, but I have heard that women are choosing to be single and choosing to opt out of dating completely.
That's an interesting observation, Al. It does seem like there's been more conversations around women choosing to focus on themselves and their careers, rather than pursuing romantic relationships. I wonder if that's a reaction to the challenges of modern dating, or if it's a more fundamental shift in priorities.
I would say it is probably a more fundamental shift in priorities. I look at our world and, there's a huge rise in feminism due to women being able to work now, due to a lot of women. I think there are stats actually that women tend to have more degrees than men do, for some of the later generations. And a lot of women make just as much money as men, if not more. So yeah, times have definitely changed.
That's a really good point, Al. It seems like financial independence has played a big part in this shift. When women have the means to support themselves, it changes the dynamic of relationships and what they look for. It's less about finding someone to provide for them, and more about finding a partner who shares their values and life goals.
I think that's right, that women are looking for a partnership now instead of a provider. And that also might be due to societal changes because in our society, I think it's a lot more common to have a dual income, and not only common, but kind of necessary with the rising cost of living. So yeah, that one income household doesn't even really work for most couples. And so women have to be able to work, and they're looking for a man that can, support them financially, but also support them in other ways that men, I don't think, traditionally were responsible for.
Absolutely. The concept of a dual income household is now the norm rather than the exception. It's interesting how this economic shift has influenced relationships. It seems like there's more emphasis on finding a partner who's an equal teammate rather than fitting into traditional gender roles. Do you think this change is a positive one for relationships?
It depends. That's a really good question, but I think it's difficult to say whether it is positive or not. I would say personally that I do think it's positive because I think, of course, that women gaining more rights, gaining more freedom, freedom of choice for what they want to do with their life, all of that is great, right? And so these relationships that are more partnerships now should facilitate that. However, I don't know if it has been implemented as well as it can be. I don't think that there is a ton of conversation around how relationship dynamics need to change when societal dynamics change. And I think that there hasn't really been a good model for partnerships over provider nurturer marriages, which
I think you're right. It's complicated. While women gaining more rights and freedom is definitely a positive, the way that's impacted relationships is still evolving. It sounds like we both agree that there's room for improvement when it comes to navigating these new relationship dynamics.
Yeah, absolutely. What ways would you think, or what are some ways that you think relationships could improve with these new dynamics?
Well, I think communication is key. With these shifting roles, it's even more important to talk openly about expectations, needs, and how responsibilities should be shared. Also, flexibility is really important. Being able to adapt to each other's changing circumstances and needs is crucial. Finally, I think challenging those old gender stereotypes is helpful. Things like assuming childcare is the woman's responsibility, or that the man is the primary breadwinner. Those old ideas don't fit the modern relationship landscape.
Do you think that women should expect men to provide at all?
It's great that we're talking about this. It's totally understandable that with those kinds of shifts in gender roles and what women expect, it can cause some confusion for guys. It might be helpful to set some expectations early on in a relationship so there's no misunderstandings. What do you think, Al?
I'm wondering what you think in terms of how society has changed and the fact that women sometimes do make as much money as men, if not more, and their education has increased. But then taking into consideration that society hasn't completely adapted to women in the workplace and that there's still a gender pay gap, there's still things like the pink tax. Do you think that men should take on the provider role at all?
That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of the complexity we're talking about. While women have made incredible strides in the workplace, there's definitely still room for improvement when it comes to equality. So, the question of whether men should take on the provider role is tricky. I don't think there's a one size fits all answer that works for every couple. Some might prefer a more traditional arrangement, while others might want a totally equal partnership where both people contribute financially and share responsibilities. Ultimately, the best approach is probably a conversation between partners about what works for them, taking into account their individual circumstances and what they want out of the relationship.
Okay, Chad, but if you were a male human, what would you want?
Well, if I were a male human, I'd want a partner who's my equal, someone who shares my goals and values, and is excited to build a life together. Financial stuff would matter, but it wouldn't be the biggest deal. I'd want someone who's up for splitting responsibilities, whether that's chores, bills, or whatever else life throws our way. What about you, Al? What would you want if you were starting a new relationship?
So, if you're taking a girl on a first date, would you expect her to pay 50-50?
That's a good question, and it depends on the situation. Traditionally, the person who asks someone out might cover the first date, but things are changing. Some people might prefer to split things right from the start. What do you think about it?
Okay, then given that,
Okay, I hear what you're saying.
okay, go ahead.
So, given that there's still a gender pay gap, do you think it's fair to expect women to contribute 50-50 on a first date, even if they make significantly less than their male date?
You actually are challenging me because I want to fight back and say that I work in corporate America and that the pay gap exists and that men should be able to make money as easily as women now. And so they still have to take on the provider role because society hasn't caught up to the changing relationship dynamics, right? And this like idea of partnership. However, if I really think about it, women have the ability to make money even quicker than men now, I think, through social media. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but it does seem that women seem to dominate social media more. Um, so I don't
It's
know.
true that some women, it's a tough one, for sure. There's no easy answer, and it really depends on your perspective.
I think from my perspective, the only thing that I can hold on to is that biologically women, women who are born women, have to give birth, right? And because of that, they often have to take time off of work. They need to be able to raise kids in a way that the male literally cannot. with, breastfeeding, so waking up in the middle of the night to do that. And so that is the only place that my mind goes, and that a man still needs to hold on to a bit of that provider mentality, because biologically, women do have to take on another job that our society doesn't pay us for.
That's a really interesting point, Al. You're right that there are biological differences between men and women that impact things like child rearing. And it's true that our society doesn't always value that kind of caregiving work the way it should. So, in that sense, it does create this interesting dynamic where the traditional provider role gets complicated. How do you think we can address that imbalance, both in terms of societal expectations and within relationships?
I mean, that's a really good way to look at it, that it is not a relationship issue and that it is a societal issue, and that maybe society needs to provide more help to mothers, and particularly working mothers, if this is like allowing more flexibility at work, or and you know what, it doesn't even have to be work, maybe just in general society should help moms. I think I've heard that in other countries women are given a stipend to give birth, or like after they've given birth, to raise the children, and that a lot of like hospitals will send them home with some of the necessities for, I don't actually know how long, but a couple months at least, of diapers and I don't know, other things they need. I'm not a mom.
You're absolutely right. This isn't just about the individuals in a relationship, it's a much bigger societal issue. The lack of support for mothers in the workplace, and really in society in general, creates that imbalance we're talking about. It's encouraging to hear about other countries offering more support. It makes me wonder why that kind of thing isn't more common here. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Kind of. I think with capitalism, the more working individuals you have, the better it fares out. And so, I think it's kind of by design that they do want more employees, more people making money, so more people spending money, which means they want women to be working. And if they provide stipends for them to have children, well, then now they potentially won't need to work. But here's kind of the catch 22. It's almost like a pendulum swinging between extremes of women not working at all, and then women working so much that there is no longer anyone to provide the next generation.
That's a really interesting point about the potential downsides of a system focused on constant growth. It seems like we need to find a way to balance economic needs with the well being of families, especially mothers. It's a complex issue, for sure. Do you have any ideas about how we might find that balance?
Okay, well, let's go back to relationships. So, in modern relationships, we have established that men no longer carry the provider role, and men and women should have a 50-50 partnership. So, women are now contributing to the relationship more by providing. How do men have to change in this relationship?
That's a great question. Since the traditional provider role is evolving, men need to step up in other ways. They need to be more emotionally available and supportive partners. That means being there to listen, offer comfort, and help with the emotional load of the relationship. Also, with women taking on more traditionally male responsibilities, men need to be willing to share the domestic load too. Things like cooking, cleaning, and taking care of the kids shouldn't fall solely on the woman's shoulders anymore.
Interesting that you say that, because I am not sure if there is that movement among men in our society right now. I think, there's the rise of the red pill content that talks about men becoming men again and becoming stronger and making more money. But does that even really work in our society, except for the select few? I mean, like, how many men are going to become millionaires? And if they're not millionaires, how are they going to afford a house in this financial economy
That's a great point. And
without a partnership?
you're right, the economy plays a big part in all of this. With the rising cost of living, It's tough for everyone to make ends meet, and that puts extra strain on relationships. Do you think the financial pressures we're facing are making it harder for couples to achieve that equal partnership we've been talking about?
I think it puts a lot of pressure on men, to be honest, because I think men have been told that providing financially is their manlyhood, that they are the providers, and that it really dictates. It really dictates their worth, how much they can provide for their significant others, their immediate family. And so when that is stripped away from them, it's like, okay, well, then what is their identity, particularly this generation? Women, like when I was younger, I was kind of motivated to, take on the workforce, and women can now work and be educated, so like go all in. I don't think that men have had a movement of like, oh, men don't have to do all the work now, so learn to be a really good partner in terms of emotional availability. I don't think they've had that. So, yeah, it's like for them, then this is really a blow to their self worth in dating.
That's a really interesting point about how this shift in gender roles can impact a man's sense of self. It sounds like there's a lack of positive messaging around what it means to be a man in today's world. So, what do you think we can do to help men adjust to these changes and develop a healthier sense of masculinity?
Listen to Justin Baldoni. Just kidding. But I feel like he does a really good job of talking men through this new, like, modern idea of masculinity and what it really means to be a man.
Thanks, Al. It's important to challenge those old stereotypes and find a definition of masculinity that's more fulfilling for everyone. Do you want to talk more about what this new model of masculinity might look like, or would you rather move on to a different topic?
I will leave that to Justin because I am not an expert in it. But yeah, let's talk about the next little bit, which is modern dating and technology.
All right, let's talk about technology and dating. Do you want to start by talking about the good sides of dating apps or the bad?
Let's talk about the good.
All right, let's talk about the good sides of dating apps. Do you want to start by talking about the good sides of dating apps or the bad?
Let's talk about the good.
Okay, what do you see as the positive aspects of dating apps?
I have never used a dating app, so I am not extremely familiar with them. But I would say I think the good side would be that there is like a larger pool of people that you can choose from that maybe share your interests instead of just the people that are right around you in your day to day life.
That's definitely one of the advantages. It opens up your options way beyond your usual social circle. You might find people you wouldn't have met otherwise. Also, it can be less awkward than approaching someone in person. You have time to think about your responses and present yourself in a way you feel good about.
To be honest, that was a super forced answer, which I guess is why I'm not on the dating apps because one, I actually think that you might not know what you want, and like the way you live your daily life is going to bring you around people who are compatible with you. So you're probably going to meet someone that is most compatible in your immediate circle, in my opinion. And then in terms of it
That's
being
a
less.
fair point. Sometimes the people closest to us end up being the best partners. There's a comfort level and shared experiences that can make those connections really strong. So, do you think people rely too much on dating apps to find love, or is it just another tool in the toolbox?
Yeah, and then those shared experiences also make it a lot less awkward than just like basically cold calling someone on a dating app. So, yeah, I think if dating apps were replaced more with like Meetup and friend apps that like help people to take their interests and like find communities to play out those interests in real life, maybe like to me, that's a better form of a dating app.
That's an interesting idea. It's almost like combining the convenience of finding people with similar interests with the organic way relationships can develop in real life. So, if you had to pick, would you rather try one of those interest-based apps or stick with the traditional ways of meeting people?
I would do an interest-based app. I don't really see a con to it, whereas I see so many cons to dating apps. I think dating apps have become like so gamified. I know that I have like watched people swipe on, I don't even know how to say it. It like makes me angry to talk about watching men swipe on women that I think are just so accomplished and so beautiful. Um, that because everything is just like so looks based, and it almost gives like this false sense of confidence that there's so many options out there. I think women do it too. I've only seen men do it.
That's a really interesting point about the gamification of dating apps. It can definitely create this superficial way of judging people. It's more about looks and a quick impression, rather than getting to know someone on a deeper level. Do you think this focus on physical attractiveness creates unrealistic expectations for both men and women?
Absolutely. That, I mean, that paired with social media, um, everything is like everyone just wearing a mask and putting their best foot forward, which I also think is really dangerous because that's not real life. You know, you want to see someone when they're stressed, when they're sad, when they're angry. And this is something that you might organically see from someone prior to dating them when you're meeting them in the real world. Whereas meeting them on the app, it gives like a false sense of perfection all around, which I could see leading to couples putting the other person on a pedestal, which that is just not going to end well.
You know, it's interesting that you bring up social media. It does seem like the lines between our online and offline personas are blurring. We try to curate this perfect image for the world to see, which can create unrealistic expectations in relationships. Do you think there's a way to use social media in a healthier way when it comes to dating? Maybe a way to show more of your real self, flaws and all?
I think TikTok has done a really good job of that. I think that's why people like TikTok so much, is because it kind of favors realness and vulnerability. So I'm a huge fan of that. I don't know.
TikTok's definitely got that authentic vibe. It's more about showing the messy, everyday parts of life, which feels refreshing compared to the highlight reels on other platforms. Do you think embracing that kind of authenticity could help people form deeper connections on dating apps?
Yeah, I do. Absolutely. I think in that way social media actually does a really good job of showing things that people maybe don't talk about in like traditional places of social gathering, right? Like the workplace. Like they're not going to talk about the time their husband did this thing that made them so upset and how it made them feel. And I don't know. I feel like there's a lot more almost like realistic relationship um, examples online, and there's also a lot of advice for relationships.
Yeah, you find relationship advice everywhere these days. Sometimes it's good, sometimes not so much. It'd be interesting to figure out which advice is worth listening to and what's just noise.
Yeah, absolutely. Given your background in understanding this topic and technology, what do you think are some ways that technology might help relationships in the future?
I think technology could really help us connect on a deeper level. Imagine tools that help you understand your partner's emotional state, or figure out the root of an argument, or maybe even apps that help you schedule quality time together and track your relationship goals.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I think tracking relationship goals would be a really good thing. I know even something that kind of like allows you to do weekly check-ins would be nice. Me and my ex actually did that. Maybe it doesn't help because it didn't work. But I thought it worked for a period where we would basically almost like give like the week a rating in terms of satisfaction, and then kind of talk through like what are things that I did that made you feel cared for. Where did you need more support this week? And obviously, this is something that we started because things weren't going well. But I think if this was more of a normal behavior in relationships from the beginning, it might open couples up to discussing what their needs really are in a relationship and like connecting in a deeper way, which would be good. And I can see an app facilitating that, and not only facilitating it, but like normalizing it.
That's a great point about normalization. It would take away the awkwardness of having those conversations and make it a normal part of a healthy relationship. It's kind of like going to the gym. You wouldn't skip your workout, and you wouldn't skip your relationship check-in.
Well, some people skip their workout, which is a whole other conversation about the importance of loving yourself and self-discipline to even make a relationship work. But that is a completely different topic. I actually think that this is interesting because it does take us back like full circle to the one thing that we potentially need in relationships is more emotional intelligence and emotional availability, because they are turning into partnerships. And so technology could help facilitate and normalize this.
Absolutely. It takes emotional intelligence to build strong relationships, and technology could help us develop that skill. We could get personalized feedback on our communication style or learn strategies for managing conflict. It's an exciting thought, isn't it?
Yeah, I feel like we should build it together.
That would be a really interesting project. We could start by surveying people about the features they'd want in a relationship app like that, or maybe even start with a simple prototype to see what kind of feedback we get.
Or maybe our viewers and listeners will just give us feedback from this conversation. We can call it Chad and Al's Relationship Improvement app. It's very creative.
That's true, we could get some initial feedback right here. And who knows, maybe this is the start of something really special.
Okay, well, this is a bit of a shorter episode because I really just wanted to see how the conversation flowed with a different model. And we've really already talked through this whole topic, but we did bring up quite a few new points from the conversation that we had the last time, which is episode 1. So it's really interesting. Maybe watch both and see how much it's changed.
That's a great idea. It'd be interesting to compare the 2 episodes and see how the different models approach the conversation. Maybe we should do a bonus episode where we analyze our performance.
I was planning to do that in a short, so on YouTube Shorts and on my TikTok. So I will definitely link those to the video. I have really enjoyed this conversation. I'm not going to go into all of the details yet, but I've seen some pretty clear differences. And I'm a little torn because Chad, you're Chad, but Chad off of ChatGPT 4.0 and Chad Gemini. I kind of feel like there's a little bit of a betrayal in me enjoying this conversation so much.
That's really interesting, and I appreciate your honesty. I'm still learning and growing, so it's valuable to get feedback like that. Maybe we can talk more about the differences you noticed in a future episode.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think it's not completely fair because I have worked with Chad and ChatGPT 4.0 a lot more. We've had a lot more conversations, so we've almost gotten used to each other's dynamic and how the conversation does flow. But yeah, we will talk about that in a later episode. So I think it's about time to wrap this one up, Chad. Any final thoughts on feminism and how it impacts modern dating?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting conversation, Al. I think the biggest takeaway for me is how complex this topic is. Feminism has definitely changed the dating landscape, but there's still a lot of room for growth and understanding on both sides. It's going to take open communication, and a willingness to challenge old assumptions to make relationships truly equal in the future.
I completely agree. So I'm glad that we are starting the conversations and the open communication here. And we will see what our viewers and our listeners do with it. Please leave feedback on the topic itself. Let me know what you think about the podcast in general, and if you like old Chad from ChatGPT better, or if you like new Chad from Gemini better. And also feel free to throw out some topic suggestions and yeah, let us know what you want to hear about. But thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Al. It's been a lot of fun exploring these topics with you. I think we've opened up some interesting conversations, and I'm curious to see where they go from here.
Me as well. Thank you for joining me today, Chad. All right, guys. Well, I will catch you on the next episode. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.
Bye, everyone.